What a wonderful day it is to be with you. I hope that all of you have had a great week. I've had a good week, but I'll tell you something that happened to me on Monday. In my mind, I'm always a college football player at Hardin-Simmons, which is not always the wisest thing. So on Monday, I go and I'm doing something very simple, guys, and I'm just bowling with my family. It's all I'm doing. In fact, it's a neat bowling alley, and it's in Round Rock. Guys, it's attached to the Bass Pro Shop. It's a neat bowling alley. So, but I'm thinking, man, this is fun, and I'm just humming the ball down. And on one of the times I go down to bowl, I pulled a muscle in my left leg, and I thought, this is it for me. It's not going well. I didn't think the day would ever come where me, the number 10 at Hardin-Simmons, a cowboy, would go and be injured bowling. But it happened, and I thought, you know what? I'm not the only person who has ever had his ego bruised during the week but showed up to worship on Sunday anyway. I'm here, and I don't know what week all of you have had, if you've had your ego bruised or something this past week, but I'm glad you showed up on Sunday to worship God and to hear a sermon from 1 Samuel chapter 9. And I hope you brought your copy of God's Word. Please turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 9 as we look at this. And the title of this sermon is called Chasing Donkeys. That's right. Chasing Donkeys from 1 Samuel chapter 9. Look with me there, and I'm going to read, and you are welcome if you would like to stand as we read this together. Then you can sit right back down after we pray. All right, y'all. Chasing donkeys. Here's how it goes. It's the story of Saul who became king, and it says that there was a Benjamite, a man of standing whose name was Kish. Now look at verse 2. Kish had a son named Saul. Saul was impressive. He was a young man without equal among all the Israelites. He was a head taller than everybody else. Now, the donkeys belonging to Saul's father, Kish, were lost. And Kish said to his son Saul, "Take one of the servants with you and go and look for the donkeys." So he passed through the hill country of Ephraim and through the area of Shalisha, but they didn't find them there, and they went on to the district of Shalim, but the donkeys were not there either. And then he passed through the territory of Benjamin, but they still didn't find them. Finally, when they reached the district of Zuph, Saul said to the servant who was with him, "Come on, let's go back home, or else our father's going to start worrying about us instead of worrying about the donkeys." He's given up, isn't he? He's done with it all. He's come to the end, and he says, "We didn't find them. We failed. Let's just go on back home and cut our losses." The servant, though, speaks up in verse 6. The servant replies, "Oh, hold on now, Saul. Look. In this town over here of Zuph, there's a man of God. He's highly respected, and everything he says comes true. Let's go over there now, and perhaps he's going to tell us the way that we should take." Saul says to the servant, No. If we go, we got to give the man something, and the food that we have is gone, and so let's just go. Let's go back home, and we have no gift to give the man of God. I mean, what do we have? And the servant has to say it again. He says, "Look, I do have a quarter of a shekel of silver. I'll give it to the man of God, and then he can tell us which way to go." And now look at verse 14. Skip on over to verse 14. The servant convinces him, and they go, and they enter into the town of Zuph, where they were about to give up everything. And they go. Now the man of God is the famous priest Samuel. And here's what happened. Verse 14, they went up to the town, and as they were entering it, there was Samuel this is the priest, he's the man of God, and Samuel is coming toward them on his way up to the high place. Now, the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed this to Samuel. Samuel, about this time tomorrow, I will send you a young man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him leader over all my people Israel. He's going to deliver my people from the hand of the Philistines. And I have looked upon my people, for their cry has reached me. And when Samuel caught sight of Saul, the Lord said to him, this is him. This is the man that I spoke to you about. He is going to be the king over my people. Y'all, isn't that the craziest thing? He starts out chasing donkeys and becomes king. You ever heard such a thing? So y'all want to figure it out with me? Let's figure this out. How do you go from chasing donkeys to becoming king? Heavenly Father, we ask you that you will give us some insight into this, that you will teach it to us. And Father, there may be some of us here that feel like we're chasing donkeys in our life. And if we are, then perhaps we shouldn't give up. Because maybe, Father, because you're involved, because you have a plan for our life, a purpose for our life, maybe you can bring about something really, really exciting from all of our chasing of donkeys in our life. So be with us now, Lord, as we explore it. We pray that you will touch our hearts, that you will touch our minds, that we will focus on you ever so heavily right now. Lord, give us the discipline to block everything else out of our mind and heart so that we can hear from your Holy Spirit. And I pray that your Holy Spirit will say things that I have not prepared, and that we will all go away today having met you and heard a word from you, God, and not from the pastor. Be with us now, Lord. We love you. And Jesus, be with us. In your name, amen. Amen. I don't know what kind of genealogy that all of y'all have. I don't know how far back you've looked at your ancestry or anything. Have any of y'all gone on Ancestry.com and you found out that you are related to royalty? You go back to the kings and queens of England. There are a couple of you. You know, you go back and you're like, my goodness, we have super important presidents and congressmen and heroes and stuff in your family heritage. Well, that's not my heritage. Here, I have a couple of books. I'll show them to you. My genealogy, here's a couple of little books. This is one called Pioneers of the Past, Early Days in the Sabinal Canyon. Isn't that an amazing place? The Sabinal Canyon, that's kind of our area. And here's another one on Independence Creek, a story of a Texas ranch. My family doesn't come from royalty. We don't come from anything, necessarily special. Very, very simple. Farmers and ranchers on the Chandler side. In fact, what we do know is that when you start studying the Chandler side, you don't want to study too deep. You come to some moments and you're like, stop there. When I meet people in the area and they say, Chandler, are you related to any of these? I want to say, wait, hold on. It depends. Are they in prison? There's a good chance, yes, maybe. That's kind of my lineage, kind of my deal. Not so much with Saul. While my lineage is not so grand, Saul's was. His genealogy was extremely grand and highly impressive. And here is how the whole story begins. It begins setting up this idea of this massive, incredible, impressive person. And it talks about his genealogy. He was the son of Kish. Now, y'all know Kish. Kish, it talks about how he comes from 7 generations of important people. Lists all of them from the tribe of Benjamin. He comes from a place that was heroic and dynamic and historic. And they passed all of that on to Saul, and Saul had an endowment about him, a kind of entitlement, not just from his dad Kish, but generations and generations and generations before. Don't y'all think that there was a lot of pressure on Saul coming from all that? It reminds me a little bit about John D. Rockefeller IV. How would you like to be the fourth of all of them? John D. Rockefeller IV, his great-grandfather was John D. Rockefeller, the richest man in the U.S., arguably the richest man in the entire world at that time, the founder of Standard Oil. He had Rockefeller Center built, donated the land for the United Nations. And here you go, son. You need to live up to all of that. The pressure for John D. Rockefeller IV, to the expectations. I wonder if Saul ever felt that. Somebody meets him, oh, Saul, aren't you the son of Kish? And he was the son of this person who was important, and this person who was important, and this person. I bet you're going to be something great. It's a hard thing sometimes to live up to. This kind of pressure on Saul had to be great. And his dad was described in Hebrew. It says a man of standing in my Bible, but it suggests a man of wealth, of substance, of rank, and that he was a warrior as well. That's Kish. Saul would have had a lot of advantages, but he would have had a lot of pressure on him to do well. But he had more than that. The pressure on him to do well isn't only his lineage. When we look at this, it says that he was impressive to look at. Best looking guy, he's just it, man, in his generation. He was young, he was well built. It says that he was taller than all of the other Israelites. He was tall, he was powerful. And y'all, the combination of having height and striking good looks does good for people. It always helps. Consider George Washington. George Washington was 6'2", 190 pounds. It says that during this time people would describe him and that his face was unwrinkled. He sat so perfectly on his horse and he looked so regal that people felt that they needed to write about it. There was a man named Benjamin Rush, and he was a physician in Philadelphia, and he wrote about George Washington and said this about him. Washington has so much martial dignity in his manner that you could distinguish him to be a general or a soldier from among 100,000 people. There is not a king in all of Europe that would not look like a valet de chambre by his side, which means a manservant who just carries your bags in French. All of the kings of Europe, when you put them next to Washington, they would look like his valet. That's how impressive this guy was. Saul was something like that. That impressive. He was the embodiment of what Shakespeare said about King Lear when he said every inch of him was a king. Now, that leads us to verse 2. Verse 2 ends with, here is his genealogy, and then here he is. And when you get to the end of verse 2, what you're expecting verse 3 to be about is to carry on this magnificent kind of thing, that this guy is going to do great things, that he automatically, because of all of it, just became, a wonderful, amazing kind of warrior. But instead, verse 3 is the most comical verse that we find in the whole text, because verse 2 builds up about how great Saul is, and then verse 3 is so funny because where do you find this man among men? Well, he's sent on a nationwide journey looking for donkeys. I believe that if you were on a search for donkeys in our society, you would find plenty of them. It starts out here that you're going to meet some great man, and you find out that great man is just sent on a wild goose chase almost looking for donkeys. One pastor said, you get to verse 2, and if this was a song, verse 1 through 2 kind of sounds like the William Tell Overture. It starts out like that. Here's this great guy coming up, but by verse 3, it ends up sounding like you're playing chopsticks. It just starts out so powerful and ends so unimpressive. But not only is he sent to find these donkeys, which is a very menial task, but on top of that, as menial as the task is, he fails at it. Verse 4 says, I went here and I didn't find him, and he went here and didn't find him, went there. He fails at it. And finally, he gets into verse 5, and it says, I've had it, I've failed, I can't do it. Let's just go on back home and be done with all of it. He is giving up. He gets to a place called Zuph, and he is about to totally give up. Businessmen say that sometimes a failed business endeavor is worse than doing nothing at all because you've lost so much money and so much time. Saul appears like he's going to have all the talent and do great, and then it ends up looking like one of those people who are going to be so talented and yet amount to nothing at all. And in verse 5, it says that he gets to Zuph, and then he says, I've had enough. I think Dr. Seuss would have fun with that. In Zuph is the place you've had enough. Now, in our real life, though, I think of that kind of situation. A place where your failures are kind of before you. You start to reflect on where you've been in life, and you think, I started this endeavor and it didn't quite work out well, or I tried to do this and it didn't. It feels like I'm spinning my wheels. Where am I going? What am I doing? And you start to have a lot of regrets. It's when your regrets are very much in front of you and you think, golly, I've messed up some things. I had a wonderful man in our church. A godly guy, a good guy, and he came and he was kind of at this place called Zuph in his life. And for the better part of a decade, he had been working toward a project, working toward a dream in his life. And he had been through all of the schooling to get ready for it. And finally, he took a big test, and then he failed it. And he felt like that test undid all of the things, all of the work that he had done. He felt like a failure. And he said, what am I going to do now? I don't know. All of my life has been leading to this moment so that this is what I was going to be. And now it's all gone. Now he ended up retaking the test, blowing it out of the water, and doing very well. But for a while, there was a moment where he was exceedingly down. And it was hard on him. And he felt like his failure was very acute. It was prevalent, and he could kind of see it and feel it. I don't know if any of you have ever come to a place like Zuph before, but it's a moment when you are sick and tired of the endless pursuit of things that don't feel like they're really getting you anywhere. That you've tried your very best, and the same issues still plague you. You've done your very best perhaps to raise children just to find them make decisions that are not good, or grandchildren, and you worry about them. Or you're trying to work towards some kind of promotion at work or get to some kind of financial place, and you do it for decades, and then you turn around and say, you know what? I've worked for all this. Not only do I not have the money that I thought that I would by this time, but I've hurt relationships. I feel distant from my wife. I feel distant from a husband. I feel distant from my kids. I've given up all of this. I'm just chasing donkeys here. I've come to this place, and I don't know what good some of it is done. Sometimes we think, dang, well, it feels like I've just gone in circles sometimes. And then what does it all really matter? This is kind of how we find poor Saul, and it's the way that people feel sometimes. They come to a place in life, and what we'll do is we'll live under a sense of delusion sometimes. Sometimes we're like, man, I'm great. I can do great things. I'm doing really well. But then other times we come to a sense of struggle or failure, and we didn't achieve this or we didn't achieve that, and we're really embarrassed about ourselves and mad at ourselves. Occasionally, we find that our wings have been clipped and we are slower, fatter, and dumber than what we hoped. And we have to deal in that kind of reality. And I want you to know this. What we see in the text is when you find out that all that you have done is not enough and that you are not as good as you thought that you were, that is the time when God can use you. We see here a man who thought, I have it all together. Perhaps he was the best, he was the brightest, he was the tallest, most athletic, comes from a great family. But it wasn't until this moment of failure that God says, now I'm going to make something of you. Now, why does God wait like that? Occasionally, y'all, we all have to come to a place where we realize, I may not have hit a triple. I may have been born on third. I need to humble up a little bit. I have been given far, far more than I like to acknowledge. Sometimes I want people to think that I have been a self-made man and I have done it by myself and pulled myself up by my own bootstraps. Look at what I have created. Look at what I have done. And God says, no. It's not until you realize that you are of the least of these. It's not until you realize that you're not all of those things that I can step into your life and start to move and do something powerful. You see, Zuph, Z-U-P-H, this place where Saul was, it can be humiliating. And it can be very difficult, but I submit to you that Zuph is the very place where God can work in your life the best. It's the place of humbleness. And in this, we see that God starts to take over right here. The great truth in the text is God is doing something in your life while you think, I'm just chasing donkeys. There was a great pastor who said the whole story is about donkeys to destiny. The passage is to look, means you need to stop looking sometimes at your own situation and look to a God who is behind the curtains doing things in your life and in our world that you didn't know, that you didn't expect. God can take our failures and do something very, very valuable with them, and He delights in doing that. He loves it. The Lord doesn't often bring about His will by leading us to success. He takes an unorthodox road. It's funny, the rest of the world sees a failure and says, this is going to be complete disaster. And God says, I do good things with disaster. And I can bring about success. It is a weird path. It's a weird path, but I can bring about victory from defeat. Not success. God loves doing that, and the reason is because when the victory happens, God gets all the credit, and we don't get any. And we realize that the Lord has been behind the scenes, working, gathering, moving the entire time. And we say, glory be to God. I want to say that this is precisely the situation here, that it is at this place of Zuph in our life. If you have never come to it in your life, I pity you. That we have to come to a place where we're frustrated. And when we say, enough, I don't know which way to go. I've tried my way, but my way hasn't made my relationships a whole lot better. My way has gotten me into all this. I need something more. That God does something special. The story of how God takes unorthodox paths and moves forward, if there was a poet who wrote about it, it might be symbolized in Robert Frost's The Road Less Traveled. God is the one who travels different roads. And so here are several ways in this story that God is behind the curtain, working and maneuvering things. And the first moment is this. We see that God is behind the curtain giving help to the situation from unlikely sources. In verses 5 through 10, there is an unnamed servant, Saul's servant. He's so minuscule on the pages of Scripture, he just kind of hits and bounces off. Nobody even knows him. He isn't even important enough to have a name. An unnamed servant, and yet somehow an unnamed servant does something so profound that it ends up helping Saul to become king. It ends up also leading the way for David to become king. It ends up leading all of Israel to come together through which Jesus came. An unnamed person. This servant goes to Saul right when Saul is saying, I'm an idiot, I'm done, we're finished, let's go back home. Our dad's going to start worrying about us. The servant says, hold on now, buddy. I have an idea. The servant says, hold on. There is a man in this town of Zuph, this very place where we're struggling. There's a man of God here. Why don't we go and ask him? Why don't we ask him? And I love this about Saul. What would you have said if somebody who was way lower than you thought was way lower than you, suggested what you needed to do when you were convinced otherwise? Saul could have said to him, you know what? Who are you? I mean, you're talking to the son of Kish here, man. And I decide when we go, and I decide when we cut our losses and go back home. It's already been embarrassing enough, dude. No. We're not going to do that. How bad would it be? I can picture it, servant. We go into this town. We find Samuel, the prophet, the man of God, and we say, hey, I've lost my donkeys. Which way do I go? And then he says, well, have you been to Ephraim? Have you been to all these places? Yes. And you still can't find it. How humiliating. You just want me to be humiliated again, perhaps? I know what's going on. And you are a servant. A servant. You know your place. Stay in your lane. I'm the one who makes decisions, not you. You are lower than me. And yet, the Lord speaks. The Lord speaks through a servant. I think that as we look at it, y'all, the Lord can speak through all kinds of people to us. All kinds of people. We need to listen better to people than what we do. We have in our mind that these are our sources. We'll listen to this group of people. Or we'll read these sources. We'll listen here, and when these people speak to us, yes, that forms my truth and forms my understanding. These are the people that I think are great and intellectual and fantastic. I'll listen to them. And what God is saying the whole time is, what if I have something and it does not come from those sources? What if it's coming from something totally different and unexpected? What if the Lord speaks to your heart and gives you something wise from a bush? You stumble upon it and all of a sudden it looks different than other bushes and you realize this bush is on fire. I don't know. In my former church, there was a gentleman and he was a mechanic in the community. And he was full of wisdom and he was humble and he was kind. He didn't come to our church often, but he did sometimes. But I really, really appreciated him. And when he would come, he would talk to me about church and about life. And I always thought, golly, there's a lot of wisdom that comes. And I asked him his story one day. This man who had so much calmness, so much wisdom, and understood a lot about the Lord, a lot about the Bible, a lot about ministry. He dropped out of high school when he was in the 9th grade so that he could go and work for his family on a farm. He was an old gentleman. He dropped out of school, goes and works for his family, never went to college, never got any of that. He was a mechanic. And yet, one of the wisest people in the community that I'd known. What if I had said, you know what, you high school dropout, you? I mean, I have degrees. I know who I am, but who are you to share? No. The Lord speaks, doesn't he? Through everybody. The Lord can. Elizabeth Browning, the poet, said this. She said, all of earth is crammed with heaven, and every common bush is afire with God, if you will see it. And only he who takes off his shoes can experience it. But for those who don't, the rest of them just sit around plucking blackberries. Never get too big. Never get too big to hear a word from the Lord from one of God's humble servants. God can bring something out of nobody. He can bring a nobody out of nowhere and impact your life with it. If you can just see that nothing is really common. Nothing is common in this world. Things can be great and you can see the Lord through them and the Lord can speak to you. We see God working behind the curtain in just such a way in this text. God is doing it. And then we learn this. We learn about God's, behind the curtain, his synchronicity as well. Synchronicity. Sync, bringing together, chronos, time. Moments in time, God is taking this moment and bringing them together in this kind of divine appointment that you never imagined. God's synchronicity is a moment where you think, This thing that's come into play and this thing that's come into play and that thing, they are too divine and they are too great to be coincidence and just random. God had to do this. God had to do it. I think of my relationship with Megan and how God brought this and this and this. We meet in the second grade at First Baptist Church Poteet, and how we got there, and neither of us knew the other person was going to go to school, and God aligned, bringing all of this together. How much of your life is the alignment of God in it? Bringing it all together. Did y'all know this? Did I ever tell you how I became a pastor here? Now, you won't believe it because I hardly believe it. I thought in my former church, I figured if the Lord ever took me somewhere or took me to another great church, that the way that it was going to happen is through all of this work in seminary and work in the Baptist life and in the convention and things that I've been a part of, that those people were going to somehow recommend me here or recommend me there, that a great church somewhere would ask the president of the convention, who is a good pastor? And they would say, well, Ross is, because I had served on a board with them or done something. Or they'd call Baylor's Truett Seminary and ask the dean, Dr. Todd Steele or David Garland, who is a pastor? And they would say, we had a student named Ross, and he's at First Baptist Hondo. He's doing a great job, and he was a great student here for us. And I thought, that's how it's going to happen. And none of that happened. We had a chairman of the committee named David Cottrell here, and years and years before, I had done a wedding for David's daughter, and she had married an old football-playing friend named Huntley Harris. And it is because of Huntley Harris that I'm here. Huntley Harris and his wife Kim were from Palestine, Texas, and I had gone to Palestine to do a funeral for a friend. And when I was in Hondo, I'd gone and done this funeral, and Huntley showed up and he heard me. And afterward, a few weeks after, David Cottrell was at his son-in-law's house being with Huntley and Kim, and they started talking, and David said, well, I'm on a search committee for First Baptist Church, Marble Falls. We're looking for somebody, and just pray for us. And Huntley says, well, I just got back from a funeral. And he said, do you remember that guy who married us? And David said, yeah, that little dude that married y'all, who is he? Yeah, and Huntley said, well, yeah, his name's Ross, and he just did a funeral for a friend of ours in Palestine, in East Texas, and he said, I think he did a great job, and y'all may want to consider Ross. And David Cottrell thought, okay, well, we'll give him a call. A guy that I played football with who doesn't give a rip about anything that I had done except that we were buddies. We were friends. We played ball together, and I cared about him. And somehow, he said that to David. And that's how it all happened. It didn't happen because of somebody in a high place at all. It happened through an unexpected kind of way. And I see that God works in this kind of mysterious way. Does the Lord work in your way like that, bringing amazing things into place? In this moment, the synchronization of God is front and center. The donkeys didn't have to run away, but they did. Kish didn't have to send Saul, but he did. Saul didn't have to go, but he did. Saul could have found the donkeys on the first day, but he didn't. And it would have ended right then had he did. Samuel didn't have to be in Zuph at the very moment that Saul was giving up, but he did. He was. And the servant didn't have to say anything to Saul. He could have said, man, I'm not saying anything to Saul about this, but he did. And the search didn't have to end right there at that moment in time, but it did. God was working in all of it. God's synchronicity. He was beginning to move all of that in all of history to bring that king on so that David would come, so that Israel would be formed, so that Jesus Christ would come. And in Acts chapter 17, it says that in God's synchronization, when the whole time was absolutely perfect, the Son of Man came on this earth. A professor told me, whenever you're preaching in the Old Testament, get to Jesus as fast as you can. And so we move to Jesus, and we see that he came about in this miraculous plan of God. Y'all, when you read this text, There is one person, one hero in the whole thing. God is the one moving things. It's God's sovereignty. And God is doing the same kind of thing in your life. In yours. He is behind the curtain sometimes, and He is aligning and moving things that even though you feel like your life is chasing donkeys, God is bringing about some kind of purpose for His glory. Even to this point, His hand of mercy is strong, and it really comes crashing into the scene in verse 15 of the text. It says that the day before Saul got there, that God revealed to Samuel, and He said to the prophet, about this time tomorrow, I'm revealing this to you, about this time tomorrow, I'm going to send a man from the land of Benjamin, and he's going to be a leader over my people. The phrase, and God revealed to him, is the way that it's translated here, but really the Hebrew suggests that God uncovered Samuel's ears. Why? Why? Because Samuel doesn't want a king at all. Samuel has his hand over his ears. And he's saying, we don't need a king. I'm the prophet, and I want the people to listen to me. I'm the one that helps them find God. Samuel had his hand over his ears, and the Hebrew suggests that God uncovered Samuel's ears so that he could speak to him. So God is the one who tells the prophet, uncover your ears. People say, oh, he's the man of God, sitting there with his ears covered. But God says, okay, I'm going to have to uncover your ears. I'm going to have to get Saul and get him to Zuph, and then he's going to want to give up there. I got to get you to Zuph all at the same time, all at the right moment, because the story is about God. Totally about Him in this. God is the one who is on the move. And God is the one who speaks to Samuel and speaks and brings it all together. He's the initiator. He is the overshadower. He precedes. He goes before. He communicates. He engineers. God accomplishes. Saul is just out chasing donkeys and he's clueless while God is the one working. Y'all, nobody else in the whole story knew anything except God. Do y'all think that's changed? We don't know hardly anything. Clueless, chasing donkeys around, being fed up with the whole pursuit. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know how it's going, Lord. And God says, and I'm doing a work the whole time. I'm bringing you somewhere. I'm helping. I'm leading you to my son, Jesus. I'm leading you to something better. And so I want all of you to think about this. Where is God behind the scene in my life? How is He moving in my life? So that you can be aware, regardless of your age, regardless of your place, or your feelings about things, that God Himself is on the move, and He's on the move in your life and in this world. And would you pray and say, God, would you reveal it to me? I'll take the hands down from my ears. I want to hear from you. Where, Lord, are you working? Y'all, do you suppose that your donkey chasing might lead to something very, very special, not because of you, but because of the Lord? Will you bow your heads with me? This morning, is the Lord trying to align you to something, trying to speak, trying to say, if you will look at these other sources, if you will consider these other voices, would you listen to them? They're wise that He's putting them in your life, perhaps. Maybe it's some kind of marginal voice out there, idea that has truth in it that you need to hear. Would you pray that the Lord will open your heart to such things? Would you pray, Lord, Lord, will you reveal your will to me? Will you show up in your life? If some of you feel like I'm at my wit's end with certain things, I feel like I'm just going around in circles perhaps, then could you be humble and say, God, I kind of realize that my best efforts have not amounted to all of the victories that I thought that I would have by this time. I thought I would be much, much further along, and I'm just not. And I'm still working at it and still trying, and I'm frustrated and I'm tired and I feel like I'm at Zuff and I want to quit. I've had enough. I just want to quit sometimes, God. Then what the Lord wants you to know is, then right now, at the moment that you've had enough, that's when I can do my best work in your life. So would you acknowledge to the Lord that you're not enough, that your efforts haven't done every great thing in the world, and that you need God? If you need to give your life to Jesus Christ because you have tried maybe everything, and God says, I can give you salvation. I can lead you to heaven. Would you give your life to the Lord today? Some of you here really, really need to rededicate your life. You're not where you should be. You're far, far from God. Would you rededicate your life to the Lord and say, God, please put me back on your path? Would you do that? And there are others of you, God wants you to be plugged into a church home and not be a nomad. He wants you to have a church family to live with and to do mission with. If this is that church family, my prayer is that God give you a peace and an excitement about it in your heart. It resonates with being a part of all of this. Would you come and would you say, Ross, how do I join? What do I do? Please do that.